Hello. Today we'll be discussing the ethics of recruitment and enrollment. I'd like to just pause to recognize that these slides were developed by the late Professor Jan van den Broek, who is my former mentor and supervisor from graduate school, and Dr. Douladel Tyndale, a friend and colleague of mine. Hopefully, we'll be able to cover the difference between recruitment and enrollment. We'll also look on the roles of recruiters and enrollers in studies and identify some issues that can arise during recruitment and enrollment, particularly for you who are now going to be focusing on your survey. We'll also discuss and suggest ethical and acceptable approaches to do recruitment and enrollment. So let's start with an explanation of the terms. Recruitment relates to a study activity of informing potential participants and their communities about the general features of a study to enhance enrollment. So, for example, you might put a ad in the newspaper, you may do a radio broadcast, or you might put a billboard in a community to advertise that you're about to do the study. Similarly, if you work in a hospital or a school setting, you may put flyers or brochures up on the campus just to alert people that a study will be done and you will be seeking to recruit participants. Enrollment is a procedure that is interactive and composed of sampling, checking eligibility, as well as receiving informed voluntary consent from a person who intend to participate in the study. So it is the act of including a participant in your study. So a little different from recruitment. Recruitment is seeing who is available or who wants to participate, but the enrollment is the procedure of actually getting them to sign up as a participant in your study. So you have two persons or two roles rather. There is the recruiter. This is the person who provides general information about the study to potential participants and often refer the participant to the persons who will do the actual enrollment. Sometimes the recruiter is not even a member of the study team. It can be, for example, somebody in media, in broadcasting, in advertisement, or it could be the investigator themselves who are posting flyers or brochures about their study to the community that they wish to enroll. The enroller is a member of the study team usually that screens the potential participant for eligibility and also conducts the process of informed consent. They must be fully aware of the study objectives and the procedures so that they can effectively explain this to the participants. So recruiters and enrollers work together and they must have good communication skill, good interpersonal skills, and be able to explain the study to the prospective participants. So let's look on some recruitment strategies. You might do a study infographic, which is a sheet of paper with usually the information about the study, and oftentimes your ethical approval asks for this. You will distribute this to members of your target population. You will place them in strategic location, and you might even hold town hall meetings or special promotional activities just to advertise your survey. So in many countries, for particular, you might think about the Jamaican context. Whenever they're going to do the survey of living conditions, the Jamaica Information Service, which is a broadcasting group in Jamaica, normally does a 15-second or 20-second advert on the study, alerting people in the Jamaican population that the study is coming out. Similarly, this might be done for other studies, especially if you're tackling hard to reach populations. So, what are some of the ethical considerations that we must bear in mind when we think about recruitment and enrollment? First, we're going to look at some of the ethical issues frequently encountered, and then we're going to look at the process of informed consent. So, one of the things that you might run into when you're trying to do recruitment is that the recruiter may intentionally or unintentionally contribute to some misconception. That is, that they might be telling the prospective participants of the benefit of participation or the missed opportunity that they will have from non-participation. Oftentimes, this might decrease voluntariness, and it often results in conflict of interest um, generated by payment or rewards per persons who are being enrolled in a study. So those are some ethical dilemmas when it comes on to recruitment. As it relates to enrollment, sometimes participants or enrollers may be faced with the pressure of enrolling a certain number of participants by a certain date. And so, because of this pressure, it can lead to stretching the eligibility criteria, forcing people to participate in the study, or withholding information so that people are more likely to participate, or use some form of undue inducement. That meaning you're trying to use some kind of reward or some other kind of benefits to get people to participate. So, what is informed voluntary consent? So, the three words actually mean something very important. So, by informed, we're saying that the recruitment and the enrollment procedures must be conducted so that the candidates or the potential participants are free to choose whether or not they want to participate. So, it's voluntary. They're also free to quit whenever they want to and without any repercussions. They are also allowed to make their own balance of the pros and cons as long as you are providing them with adequate information so that they're making an informed decision. And whether or not they choose to consent should not affect any kind of relationship that they might have with persons who are conducting the study. So, if you were to define informed consent according to the International Ethical Guidelines for Epidemiological Studies, it is defined as a decision to participate in research taken by an individual who has received necessary information and has adequately understood this information so as to arrive at a decision without being subject to force, undue influence, intimidation, or any kind of enticement. The person must also be of sound mind, and so this definition speaks to what is known as a competent individual. There is a difference, however, between assent and consent. When a potential research participant or subject is deemed incapable of giving consent, meaning that they might be underage, they give what is known as assent. However, in the case of an underage individual, an older legal guardian or legal representative or parent must give consent for that person to participate alongside the person's or the individual own assent. So let me just repeat that for you. Assent, if you have special populations such as an underage group, they say, yes, we want to participate, but somebody who's legally responsible, a legal guardian or parent, must give consent. So, what are some of the factors that research participants commonly perceive as pros to their participation? If it's a medical related study, it's the opportunity to please the doctor, the superior, or the group. It's an opportunity to make a contribution to society. And sometimes they see some benefit that they might get or some incentive. A lot of studies, for example, if you're measuring blood pressure, you might get their blood pressure test done for free. Some studies might give phone card as a way of compensating for participants' time in doing the study. In terms of informed voluntary consent, some of the factors that can be considered negative is the cost of time. So people would have to then leave their activities and commit their own time and mental effort into doing your study, and so that can be a negative. There's also possible harm to health, privacy, as well as confidentiality. If you're thinking about drawing or taking blood samples, then the person is exposed to certain risk. There's also the fear that if they participate, they will displease family members, friends, partner, and so forth. And so there is those general drawback as to why people might not consent to participate in a study. So if you look at this diagrammatically or pictorially, you'll see that the enroller, through a media presentation, brochure, infographic, presents the information about the study. There is some dialogue that takes place, and then there is an assessment of understanding. After that, the enroller then allow people consider people to consider whether or not they participate, and then a decision is arrived at. If the person says yes, then you confirm that decision to participate, and the person will then complete the consent process, and you start all over again with a new person. However, if the person chooses not to participate, then you would have no further contact with that individual. So, how do we actually conduct the informed consent process? First, we must create an consent form, and this is a written and approved document which is presented to the participants for them to read, understand, discuss, ask any question that they might have, and think about it before they sign it, as well as take a personal copy, as well as the researcher having a particular copy. They might want to take it overnight to discuss it with their family members, and that's also an okay thing to do. So, what information should be discussed in the consent process? You want to emphasize what the research is for, what is the rationale, what is the aim of the study, what are the number of participants that you're hoping to include above and beyond this person, reason why you're inviting this person in particular to participate, do they meet some eligibility criteria, uh, and a description of the number and type of contact. So how often are you going to contact them? How long are the visits going to be, and what are you going to be contacting them about? So if it's a questionnaire, state what some of the questions might look like. If it's some form of intervention, describe what that is, or procedure, describe what those are, and emphasize whatever might be experimental if relevant, because some things might be known and some things might be like an experiment, so you want to explain that. So in a nutshell, the person should be fully aware of what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and how long it's going to take. So talk about the benefits, talk about if there's compensation for travel costs or possibly injuries, how the person's privacy and confidentiality will be protected. Talk about their right to withdraw at any time because the process is voluntarily done, and also emphasize on the fact that there are no repercussions if the person chooses not to participate. It is important to tell the person who is sponsoring the study so that they can arrive at any decision on conflict of interest by themselves, who to contact should they have questions after they have enrolled, and a statement that declares their understanding of what they're about to sign. And then, of course, you need your signature, the enroller's signature, and a witness to just say that yes, both persons have signed. So some of the basic things is that try not to do it if you are an authority figure in the person's life. If you feel that the person will be influenced by your position, avoid force or enticements. Get the enroller to have an excellent knowledge of the study so that they can explain it. And somebody who's responsible for the study, a principal investigator or a doctor, should always be available for the person to discuss any question they might have by telephone. So a telephone number should be provided. In the later phases of the informed consent process, so after you have collected the signature and the person has decided yes, they're going to participate, you might want to scan this document, and then go over, if it's a study that is long term, go over that with the participant to discuss some of the things that they might forget. There are sometimes relevant interim information that might arise from the study itself, like side effects. If you find that the persons are exposed to side effects, you might want to communicate that with the participant. So that's an okay contact to make. There's what we call the yes doctor syndrome. People sometimes are very eager to say yes to a doctor or a nurse because they see these people as superior figures and people who they can get benefit from. So they want to please these individuals. So one of the things you want to do is you want to remove these individuals from the process of seeking enrollment, because oftentimes there is some inducement. Even though this might not be intentional, there is unintentional inducement. So you want to avoid that at all costs. So what can you do about it? You want to let people know that, doesn't matter what my position is, they have a right, and They can refuse or they can agree to participate, and the treatment that a doctor or a nurse might give will not be determined or changed on the basis of saying yes or no to participation in a study. So think about these things. These are important concepts when we're thinking about the informed consent process. So what really is coercion or undue influence? Since people are free to choose, anything that we do to impede one's consideration regarding a pro or con can become seen as coercion or undue influence. So, for example, if you make an intentional threat of harm, whether it is explicit or implicit, to obtain the agreement from the participant, that's considered coercion. An undue influence is if you make an offer of an excessive or unwarranted or improper reward to obtain agreement. So, for example, if you are trying to make an award of a large sum of cash, and that's usually unethical. But if you're giving a phone card or if you're compensating the person for their time or transportation, that's usually seen to be fine. So you want to avoid it. If you don't participate, I will tell you X, or I will withhold information from you, or this may be your last chance to. These are all ways in which we can come across as being forceful or kind of giving undue influence. You can get what is known as community consent versus individual consent, and they're not mutually exclusive. If if you are looking at a community study where the unit of analysis, what you're looking at is a community and not individuals. So you're studying the community. You can do an introductory meeting with local leaders, form a meeting with the local leaders, and perhaps even a council with local leaders. You can make personal visits to the leaders, meetings with traditional healers, and you can also get individual informed consent. It can differ according to your social or geographical setting, but let's say you're looking at a community center and what the community center has done to improve health and well-being in a particular community, and you are just assessing what the community center has done. Now, the community center is run by people, but you might not get individual consent from the individuals, but you can get an overarching consent on a community consent basis, that the community consents for you to use the data collected by the community center to kind of assess whether or not the community center has done effectively what it sought to do initially. So in Africa, community participation is a fundamental aspect of individual decision, and so if the community doesn't participate, then individual consent can be very difficult to obtain. In this scenario, community consent should not replace individual consent. And so you want both community consent and individual consent, but the community consent is important because it may enhance individual consent. And then finally, you have special cases. So internet-based surveys, the individual is doing this as an online thing. There's a question about whether if the consent is truly informed, given that the person is not face to face to ask question with an individual. Is a click of a button considered a signature? Is the person who completed the questionnaire the intended participant, or could somebody fictitiously complete the questionnaire? Can anonymity be assured? There are some serious considerations to be taken into account when we're looking at internet-based surveys. If you are planning to save, for example, future samples or specimen of an individual, then you want to get what is known as prospective consent, which is to explain to the individuals that you'll be keeping their samples and for what purpose you might be keeping their sample. And so this individual will give you permission, if they so choose, to use their sample for future events. Okay? What I want you to do now is take a break, review what I've just covered, and then I'll do another podcast in which we go through an actual example of a consent form so you can see what that looked like and have a good look at how to create your own consent form as you develop your own questionnaire.